The night of October 31st, 1981, began like any other in the pristine neighborhood of Privet Drive, Little Whinging, Surrey. The streetlights hummed their electric lullaby, casting pools of amber light onto perfectly manicured lawns and identical houses that stood in neat rows like toy soldiers on parade. Behind lace curtains and double-glazed windows, television sets flickered with the evening news, and the residents of this most ordinary of streets prepared for bed, blissfully unaware that their world, the Muggle world, existed alongside another hidden realm, where magic was as real as the air they breathed. But on this particular night, that invisible barrier between the magical and the mundane was about to grow thin. At precisely 11:30, the street lights along Privet Drive began to behave strangely. They flickered once, twice, then dimmed to a soft glow that barely illuminated the pavement below. A tabby cat sat beneath the lamppost at the corner of Privet Drive and Magnolia Crescent, so still it might have been carved from stone. Its markings were distinctive, square patterns around its eyes that gave it an oddly spectacled appearance, and it had been sitting there, unmoving since dawn. The cat's eyes, bright and intelligent, watched the street with an intensity no ordinary feline could possess. Every so often, they would flick toward number 4, a house indistinguishable from its neighbors except for the pristine condition of its front garden and the almost aggressive orderliness of its appearance. Inside number 4, Vernon and Petunia Dursley slept soundly, their son Dudley snoring in his second bedroom, the larger of the two, surrounded by toys that would have filled a small shop. They knew nothing of the magical world. Or rather, Petunia knew of it and had spent her entire adult life pretending it didn't exist, that her sister hadn't been a witch, that magic was nothing more than childish fantasy and dangerous nonsense. Tonight, that pretense was about to become impossible to maintain. The cat's ears twitched suddenly, picking up a sound no human could have heard, the soft displacement of air that came with magical apparition. A moment later, a man appeared at the corner of the street, materializing out of thin air as casually as if he'd stepped out from behind a curtain. He was tall and thin, with silver hair and a beard long enough to tuck into his belt. He wore long robes of deep purple, a cloak that swept the ground, and boots with buckled heels. But it was his eyes, bright blue and twinkling even in the darkness, that marked him as extraordinary. Half-moon spectacles sat upon a crooked nose that looked as though it had been broken at least twice, and his expression held the weight of both immense wisdom and terrible sorrow. Professor Albus Dumbledore, headmaster of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, chief warlock of the Wizengamot, supreme mugwump of the International Confederation of Wizards, had arrived in Little Whinging. He paused at the corner, surveying the street with those penetrating blue eyes, then reached into his robes and withdrew what appeared to be a silver cigarette lighter. He clicked it once, and the nearest street light went out with a soft pop. He clicked it again, and the next light extinguished. One by one, he walked down the street, pulling the light from each lamp until Privet Drive was bathed in darkness, save for the faint glow from two eyes at the far end, the eyes of the cat beneath the final lamppost. Dumbledore pocketed the put-outer and moved toward the cat, with a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Good evening, Professor McGonagall," he said pleasantly, as if greeting a colleague in a school corridor rather than addressing a cat on a suburban street. The tabby cat's form shimmered and shifted, and where the feline had sat, a tall, severe-looking woman now stood. She wore square spectacles, identical to the markings the cat had possessed, and her black hair was pulled into a tight bun. Professor Minerva McGonagall, deputy headmistress of Hogwarts and Transfiguration teacher, looked stern even in the darkness. "How did you know it was me?" she asked, though her lips twitched slightly. She had asked this question before, in different circumstances, and knew what his answer would be. "My dear Professor, I've never seen a cat sit so stiffly," Dumbledore replied, his eyes twinkling despite the gravity of the situation. "You'd be stiff if you'd been sitting on a brick wall all day," McGonagall said sharply, though there was no real anger in her voice. She looked around the dark street and lowered her voice. "Albus, the rumours, are they true? About the Potters? About Lily and James?" The twinkle vanished from Dumbledore's eyes as surely as if it had been snuffed out like the street lights. He suddenly looked every one of his 150 years. "I'm afraid," he said heavily, "that they are true, Minerva." McGonagall's face crumpled, and for a moment she looked as though she might collapse. She steadied herself against the wall, one hand pressed to her mouth. "James and Lily, dead. I can't believe it. I didn't want to believe it. Oh, Albus." Her voice broke, and she couldn't continue. The war against the Dark Lord Voldemort, he who must not be named, had claimed many lives over the past 11 years. Friends, colleagues, students she had taught. But James and Lily Potter had been so young, so full of promise, so brave. And now they are gone, leaving behind an orphaned child. "It's true," Dumbledore said softly, "but that's not the worst of it, Minerva. Voldemort attacked them, yes, killed James first, then went after Lily and the child. But when he tried to kill young Harry Potter, something happened." McGonagall looked up sharply. "The child survived." "Not merely survived," Dumbledore said, and now there was something like wonder in his voice, mixed with the sorrow. "When Voldemort tried to kill Harry, the curse rebounded. Voldemort is gone, Minerva, destroyed by his own curse. The boy lived with nothing but a cut on his forehead, a lightning-shaped scar. Voldemort, gone," McGonagall whispered, hardly daring to believe it. "After all these years? But how?" "We don't fully understand it yet," Dumbledore admitted. "But Lily's love for her son, her sacrifice, it created a protection Voldemort couldn't penetrate. When he tried to curse Harry, the magic rebounded upon him. His body was destroyed, his powers gone. He may not be truly dead. Something as evil as Voldemort never truly dies. But he is vanquished, reduced to something less than the meanest ghost." McGonagall took this in, her mind reeling. The war was over. After 11 years of fear, of friends disappearing in the night, of constant vigilance and mounting casualties, the war was finally over. They had won, but the victory tasted of ashes when she thought of those who had died to achieve it. "The celebrations," she said suddenly, remembering the strange behavior she'd witnessed throughout the day. "I've been sitting here all day watching these muggles, and I've never seen anything like what I saw in the wizarding world. Owls flying in broad daylight, shooting stars at noon, people in cloaks hugging each other in the streets, unable to contain their joy. They're calling the boy who lived. Every child in our world will know his name. Precisely why he must come here," Dumbledore said, turning to look at number 4 Privet Drive. His expression was troubled. Fame is a dangerous thing for a child, Minerva. Young Harry will be safe here, away from all that, able to grow up normally before he learns of his past. Safe? McGonagall's voice rose sharply. With these people, Albus, I've been watching them all day. You couldn't find 2 people more different from us if you tried. That Dursley man shouted at his wife about her sister being a, well, you can imagine what he called her, and their son. I saw him kicking his mother all the way up the street, screaming for sweets. Harry Potter came and lived here. These people are the only family he has left, Dumbledore said firmly, though not unkindly. Petunia Dursley is Lily's sister. She is blood, and blood creates protections, Minerva. As long as Harry can call this place home, Lily's sacrifice will continue to protect him. No Death Eater, no dark wizard who served Voldemort will be able to touch him here. McGonagall looked as though she wanted to argue further, but she pressed her lips together in a thin line. She had worked with Albus Dumbledore for long enough to know that when he made up his mind about something, particularly something involving complex magic and ancient protections, he was rarely wrong. But will they treat him well? She asked quietly. Will they tell him about his parents, about what they died for, about his mother's sacrifice? I have written Petunia a letter, Dumbledore said, producing an envelope from his robes. I am explaining everything about Harry's parents, about what happened, about why he must remain here. I am trusting that she will remember her sister with love, that she will understand the gravity of what I am asking of her. McGonagall looked skeptical but said nothing. She pulled her cloak tighter around herself against the November chill and gazed up at the sky. When will Hagrid arrive with the child? As if in answer to her question, a low rumbling sound broke the silence of the sleeping street. It grew louder, a deep purring roar that seemed to come from the sky itself. Both witches and wizards looked up to see a huge motorcycle descending through the air, its single headlight cutting through the darkness like a falling star. The motorcycle was enormous. It would have to be, to carry its rider. Rubeus Hagrid, keeper of keys and grounds at Hogwarts, was nearly twice as tall as a normal man, and at least 5 times as wide. He had a long tangle of black hair and a wild, bushy beard that obscured most of his face. His black eyes glinted kindly beneath thick eyebrows as he brought the motorcycle down gently onto the street, killing the engine with a soft click. In his massive arms, looking impossibly small and fragile, was a bundle of blankets. From within the blankets came the soft sounds of a sleeping baby. Hagrid, Dumbledore said warmly, though his voice was heavy with emotion. At last, and this must be young Harry Potter. Hagrid climbed off the motorcycle carefully, cradling the bundle as gently as if it were made of spun glass. His face, what could be seen of it, was streaked with tears that glistened in the faint light from the distant street lamps. Fell asleep just as we were flying over Bristol, Hagrid said, his voice rough with emotion. I tried not to wake him, poor little tyke. Professor Dumbledore, sir. His voice broke. Is it true? About Lily and James? I can hardly believe it. I can't. He pulled out an enormous spotted handkerchief and buried his face in it. His sobs echoed down the silent street, and McGonagall placed a comforting hand on his arm, though she had to reach up to do so. There, Hagrid, she said softly, her own voice thick. It's true, I'm afraid. But James and Lily died protecting their son. They died heroes. It's not fair, Hagrid said through his tears. He's just a baby, not even 2 years old. And now he's got no mum, no dad. Little Harry Potter, all alone in the world. Dumbledore stepped forward and gently pulled back the blankets to reveal the child's face. Harry Potter was fast asleep, his small mouth slightly open, one tiny fist curled near his cheek. He had his mother's features, delicate and fine, but already showed signs of his father's unruly black hair. On his forehead, barely visible beneath the dark locks, was a thin cut in the shape of a lightning bolt, the scar that would define his life. "He's beautiful," McGonagall whispered, reaching out to touch the baby's soft cheek. Tears rolled down her own face now, though she made no sound. "He looks so much like James, but he has Lily's eyes." They stood there for a long moment, 3 of the most powerful witches and wizards in Britain, gazing down at a sleeping baby who had, through no choice of his own, become a legend. The boy who lived, the child who had defeated the darkest wizard of the age through pure, selfless love. Could I say goodbye to him, sir?" Hagrid asked, his voice small and broken. "I was the one who pulled him from the ruins, you see, from the house in Godric's Hollow after it happened. I was the last one to hold him while his parents were still, while they were still warm." "Of course," Dumbledore said gently. Hagrid bent down and pressed a gentle kiss to Harry's forehead, just above the lightning scar. "You'll be a great wizard, Harry," he whispered, "just like your mum and dad. And I'll see you again someday, I promise. I'll make sure you know how much they loved you." With obvious reluctance, he handed the bundle to Dumbledore. The headmaster took the child carefully and moved toward number 4 Privet Drive. He climbed the steps slowly, each one seeming to age him further, and gently laid the bundle on the doorstep. He tucked the blankets more securely around the sleeping baby, then placed the letter he had written to Petunia on top of the blankets where it couldn't be missed. For a long moment, Dumbledore stood there, gazing down at the child. He reached out and gently touched the lightning-shaped scar with one long finger. "Good luck, Harry," he murmured, so softly that McGonagall and Hagrid couldn't hear. "You're going to need it." He straightened and turned back to his colleagues. McGonagall had transformed back into a cat and was sitting on the wall, her tail wrapped neatly around her paws. Hagrid was wiping his eyes on his enormous handkerchief, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. "We should go," Dumbledore said quietly. "There's nothing more we can do here tonight. Hagrid, I'll need Sirius's motorcycle back. I'll return it to him when he's cleared of these ridiculous charges." "Sirius Black would never betray James and Lily," Hagrid said fiercely, momentarily forgetting his grief. "He was their best friend. He was Harry's godfather." "I know," Dumbledore said, and his voice was infinitely sad. "But Peter Pettigrew is dead, killed by Sirius along with 12 muggles, or so the Ministry believes. Until we can sort out the truth, Sirius is bound for Azkaban." "It doesn't make sense," Hagrid muttered. "None of it makes sense. Very little about this night makes sense," Dumbledore agreed. "But we must have faith that the truth will emerge. Now come, both of you. We must leave before the muggles wake." He pulled out the put-outer once more and clicked it. The lights that had been extinguished earlier flew back into the street lamps like shooting stars in reverse, and Privet Drive was once again illuminated by its pools of amber light. McGonagall remained in her cat form, her spectacled eyes fixed on the bundle on the doorstep. "I'll stay," she said, her voice oddly melodious in her feline form, "just to make sure they find him, to make sure they take him in." Dumbledore nodded. "Very well, Minerva, but don't wait too long. You need your rest as well." He laid a hand on Hagrid's shoulder. "Come, my friend, let us return to Hogwarts. There will be much to do in the coming days." Hagrid took one last look at the small bundle on the doorstep, then climbed onto the motorcycle. The engine roared to life, and with a final nod to McGonagall, the enormous machine rose into the air and vanished into the night sky. Dumbledore watched them go, then turned to the cat on the wall. "Take care, Minerva, and remember, this is for the best. The boy needs a normal childhood, away from the fame and the expectations. Here, he can simply be Harry, not the boy who lived." McGonagall's tail twitched, but she said nothing. Dumbledore smiled sadly, then turned on his heel and disappeared with a soft crack of displaced air. The cat was alone on Privet Drive once more, watching over the sleeping child as the night deepened around them. Inside number 4, nothing stirred. The Dursleys slept on, unaware that their world was about to change forever. That magic, that terrible, wonderful, impossible magic, was about to force its way into their carefully ordered lives, whether they wanted it or not. On the doorstep, baby Harry Potter stirred in his blankets, but didn't wake. He dreamed perhaps of green light and a woman's scream, or perhaps of nothing at all. His small hand clutched at the blanket, and the lightning-shaped scar on his forehead stood out clearly in the lamplight, a mark of love and sacrifice, of loss and survival, of a destiny that had only just begun. In the distance, so faint it might have been imagination, the sound of celebration could be heard. Somewhere in the hidden magical world, wizards and witches were raising glasses to toast the end of a dark era. They were dancing in the streets, shooting off fireworks that spelled out messages of hope and victory. They were crying tears of joy and relief, embracing strangers and whispering the name Harry Potter like a prayer. But here on Privet Drive, the boy himself slept on, alone and unknowing, while a tabby cat kept vigil through the long, dark hours until dawn. Miles away from the silent streets of Little Whinging, in a part of England that existed on no Muggle map, a crooked house stood alone on a windswept hill. The burrow, as it was known to those who could find it, looked as though it had been built by a wizard who had learned architecture from a book written by a mad poet. It rose several stories into the air, held together, or so it seemed, by nothing more than magic and stubborn determination. Chimneys sprouted from the roof at odd angles. Windows sat askew in walls that bulged outward in places they shouldn't, and the whole structure leaned slightly to the left as if perpetually caught in a strong wind. Yet for all its apparent precariousness, the burrow radiated warmth. Smoke curled from the chimneys, golden light spilled from the windows, and the garden, wild and overgrown though it was, seemed to hum with life even in the darkness of late October. Inside, the kitchen was the heart of the home. It was a large, cluttered space with a low ceiling from which hung bunches of dried herbs, strings of onions, and copper pans that gleamed in the firelight. A scrubbed wooden table dominated the center of the room, surrounded by mismatched chairs. The sink was piled with dishes that washed themselves with lazy, soapy movements, and the stove, an ancient black iron thing that looked as though It had been conjured rather than built, emanated heat and the lingering scent of the evening supper. But tonight, the warmth of the kitchen couldn't quite chase away the chill that had settled over the Weasley family. They sat around the table in near silence, a rare occurrence in a household usually filled with noise and laughter. Arthur Weasley sat at the head, his balding red hair catching the firelight, his face drawn and tired. He still wore his work robes from the Ministry of Magic, though he'd loosened the collar and rolled up his sleeves. His hands cupped a mug of tea that had long since gone cold. Beside him, Molly Weasley sat with her head bowed, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Her plump, kind face was blotchy and swollen from crying, and she clutched a handkerchief so tightly her knuckles had gone white. On the table before her sat a single candle, its flame dancing and flickering in the draughts that whispered through the old house. Their children occupied the other chairs. Bill, the eldest at 11 and recently started at Hogwarts, sat straight-backed and solemn, trying to be grown up, though his eyes were red-rimmed. Charlie, 9 years old, with the stocky build that would one day serve him well, working with dragons, stared into the fire with an expression too old for his years. Percy, barely 5 and still round-cheeked with babyhood, sat on a cushioned chair, clutching a toy cauldron, his eyes wide and confused as he watched his mother cry. The twins, Fred and George, were 3 years old and mercifully asleep upstairs in their room. Baby Ron, barely 15 months old, dozed in a cradle near the fire, his thumb in his mouth, oblivious to the grief that saturated the room like smoke. Outside, the sound of distant celebration could be heard. Fireworks bloomed in the sky over the neighboring village of Ottery St. Catchpole, wizarding fireworks that spelled out messages of joy and victory. Dragons made of green and gold sparks chased each other across the stars. Phoenixes of crimson and orange flame rose and fell in graceful arcs, and everywhere, woven through the displays in letters 10 feet tall, were the words, "He's gone. We're free. The boy who lived." But here in the burrow, there was only sorrow. "I still can't believe it," Molly whispered, her voice hoarse from crying. "Gideon and Fabian, my brothers, they're really gone." Arthur reached over and took her hand, squeezing it gently. His own eyes were suspiciously bright, though he was trying to be strong for his wife and children. "They died fighting, Molly. They died protecting others. They were heroes." "I don't want them to be heroes." Molly's voice rose, cracking with anguish. "I want them to be here. I want them to come through that door with their ridiculous jokes and their wild stories. I want them to pick up the boys and swing them around until they're dizzy. I want—" She broke off, covering her face with her handkerchief, as fresh sobs racked her body. Arthur moved his chair closer and wrapped his arms around her, holding her as she wept into his shoulder. Bill watched his parents with a lump in his throat. He'd loved his uncles. Uncle Gideon had taught him his first chess moves, always letting him win until Bill was old enough to earn his victories honestly. Uncle Fabian had shown him how to skip stones across the pond behind the burrow, competing to see who could make theirs skip the farthest. They had been larger than life, always laughing, always ready with a word of encouragement or a silly prank. And now they were dead, killed by Death Eaters, Antonin Dolohov and 4 others, the whispers said. They'd taken down several of their attackers before falling, fought back to back as they always had. Twins who'd done everything together, including, in the end, dying. Dad, Charlie said quietly, his voice small in the heavy silence. They're saying you know who is gone. Really gone. Is it true? Arthur looked up, his arm still around Molly's shoulders. Yes, Charlie, it's true. He tried to kill a baby, Harry Potter, James and Lily's son, and somehow the curse rebounded. Voldemort is gone. Molly flinched at the name, but didn't admonish Arthur for using it. She'd given up that particular battle years ago. But if he's gone, Charlie continued, his young face screwed up in confusion, why is Mum still crying? Isn't it supposed to be over now? Aren't we supposed to be happy? Oh, sweetheart, Molly said, pulling away from Arthur to look at her son. Her voice was thick but gentle. It is over, and we are grateful for that. But your uncles, they died just last week, fighting in the war. They died so that this day could come, so that you and your brothers could grow up in a world free from fear. But that doesn't mean we don't miss them terribly. Will they come back? Percy asked in a tiny voice. He didn't fully understand death yet, thought perhaps it was something temporary, something that could be fixed with the right spell. No, darling, Molly said softly, fresh tears streaming down her face. They won't come back, but they'll always be with us here. She placed her hand over Percy's small chest, above his heart. As long as we remember them and love them, they'll never truly be gone. Percy considered this with the serious expression he wore even as a young child, then nodded slowly. I'll remember them, he said solemnly. I promise. Bill cleared his throat, trying to steady his voice. Professor McGonagall pulled me aside before I left Hogwarts for the holiday. She wanted me to know about Uncle Gideon and Uncle Fabian. She said they were two of the best wizards she'd ever taught. She said they stood up to evil when others ran away. That sounds like them, Arthur said with a sad smile. Your uncles never backed down from a fight, especially when it was for something they believed in. They believed in a world where people like us, like all of us, could live freely and safely, where blood status didn't matter, where dark wizards couldn't terrorize innocent people. They got their wish then, Charlie said quietly. Didn't they? Because of what they did, because they fought. You know who is gone now. Yes, Molly said, her voice breaking. Yes, they got their wish. They didn't live to see it. She stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor, and moved to the mantelpiece above the fire. There, among the clutter of family photographs, wizarding photos where the subjects waved and smiled and moved about, she found what she was looking for. 2 frames, sitting side by side. In the first photograph, Gideon Prewett grinned out at the world, his red hair wild and his arms slung around his twin brother's shoulders. In the second, Fabian returned the grin, his wand raised in a cheerful salute. They looked so alive, so full of mischief and joy, that it seemed impossible they were gone. Molly brought the photographs back to the table and set them on either side of the candle. The flickering light made the images seem to dance, making her brothers seem almost present. I wanted to wait until your father got home from the ministry, she said, her voice steadier now, though still thick with emotion. I wanted us to do this together, as a family. Tonight, while the rest of the wizarding world celebrates, we're going to remember Gideon and Fabian. We're going to tell stories about them, share our favorite memories, and make sure that their names and their sacrifice are never forgotten in this house. Arthur stood and moved to stand beside his wife. placing his hand on her shoulder. Your mother's right. Yes, we'll celebrate the end of the war. Yes, we'll be grateful for the peace that so many fought and died to achieve. But first, we honor those we've lost. He looked at each of his sons in turn, his expression serious. This war has taken too much from too many families. The Potters, the Prewets, the Bones, the McKinnons. So many good people are gone. And while the world celebrates tonight, there are families all over Britain sitting in darkness, mourning their dead. We must never forget that this peace was bought with blood and sacrifice. But Dad, Bill said hesitantly, we can still be happy that it's over, can't we? We can still be grateful. Of course, Arthur said warmly. Joy and sorrow can exist side by side, Bill. We can mourn what we've lost while still being grateful for what we've gained. That's what it means to be human, to hold both happiness and sadness in our hearts at the same time. Molly wiped her eyes and took a deep breath, visibly trying to compose herself. Right, she said, her voice taking on the brisk, practical tone her children knew so well. Let's start with something happy. Bill, why don't you tell us your favorite memory of your uncles? Bill thought for a moment, a small smile crossing his face. Remember when I was 7, and Uncle Gideon taught me that joke spell that made Dad's tea sing opera every time he tried to drink it. Arthur groaned good-naturedly. Oh, I remember. Couldn't enjoy a peaceful cup of tea for a week. It sang in Italian, Bill continued, grinning now. Really loud Italian. And every time Dad would glare at Uncle Gideon, he'd just smile innocently and say, What? I think it's an improvement. Very cultural. Charlie laughed, a sound that seemed to surprise him after the heavy mood. What about when they convinced Charlie that they'd found dragon eggs in the garden? Oh no, Molly said. But she was smiling through her tears. I'd forgotten about that. They painted chicken eggs to look like dragon eggs, Charlie explained, the memory warming him. Told me I had to sit on them to keep them warm until they hatched. I spent 3 hours sitting on those eggs in the cold before Mum found me. You were so disappointed when we told you the truth, Arthur said, shaking his head. Gideon felt so guilty he spent the rest of the day teaching you everything he knew about dragons to make up for it. That's when I decided I wanted to work with dragons someday, Charlie said softly, because of Uncle Gideon. The stories continued, each memory bringing both laughter and tears. They remembered the time Fabian had charmed all the garden gnomes to sing Christmas carols in July. They remembered when both uncles had shown up to Bill's first day of primary school before Hogwarts in full wizarding robes, not understanding why Molly was so horrified. They remembered countless Sunday dinners, holiday celebrations, and ordinary moments made extraordinary by the twins' presence. Even Percy, young as he was, contributed a memory of Uncle Fabian, letting him help polish his wand, telling the serious little boy that it was very important work that required someone responsible. As they talked, the candle between the photographs burned steadily, a small flame against the darkness. Outside, the fireworks continued, but inside the burrow, time seemed to slow and soften. The grief was still there. It would always be there. But it was joined now by warmth, by love, by the knowledge that Gideon and Fabian Pruitt had been cherished and would be remembered. Finally, when Ron began to fuss in his cradle and the older boys were yawning despite themselves, Molly stood and moved to the window. She looked out at the distant fireworks, at the celebrations that lit up the night sky. They would have loved this, she said quietly. Gideon and Fabian, they would have been right in the thick of it, setting off the biggest fireworks, leading the loudest cheers. They lived for joy and laughter. Then that's how we should remember them, Arthur said, joining her at the window. Not just as heroes who died fighting, but as men who lived fully, who loved deeply, who brought light wherever they went. Molly nodded, leaning into her husband's embrace. The world is celebrating the boy who lived tonight, Harry Potter, the child who defeated Voldemort. But how many people are thinking about all the others who lived and fought and died to make this moment possible? We are, Bill said from the table, his voice firm despite his youth. We're thinking about them. We're remembering them. And we always will, Charlie added. We'll tell our children about Uncle Gideon and Uncle Fabian. We'll make sure everyone knows what they did. Molly turned from the window and looked at her sons with such fierce love that it made her chest ache. You're good boys, she said, her voice thick again. Your uncles would be so proud of you. They died fighting for a better world. And here you are, bright, brave, kind boys who will help build that world. That's the greatest honor we can give them. To live well, to be good, to make the world they died for worth the sacrifice. She moved around the table, kissing each of her sons on the forehead. Off to bed now, all of you. It's late, and we've all had a very long, very emotional day. But what about the celebrations? Charlie asked, even as he yawned. Don't you want to go join them? Tomorrow, Arthur said gently. Tomorrow, we'll celebrate properly. Tonight was for remembering, for honoring, for grieving. But tomorrow, we'll join the rest of the wizarding world in giving thanks for this new peace. The boys trooped upstairs, even Percy managing to climb the stairs without help, though his eyes were drooping with exhaustion. Bill paused at the doorway, looking back at his parents. Mum, Dad, I'm glad we did this. I'm glad we remembered Uncle Gideon and Uncle Fabian properly, instead of just forgetting them in all the celebrations. So am I, sweetheart, Molly said softly. So am I. When the boys had gone upstairs and the house had settled into the creaking quiet of night, Arthur and Molly remained at the kitchen table. The candle still burned between the photographs of Molly's brothers, and she reached out to touch each frame gently. I keep thinking, she said softly, about Lily and James Potter, about how they died the same way my brothers did, fighting to protect others. And now their son is all alone in the world, orphaned by this terrible war. Dumbledore will make sure he's cared for, Arthur said, though his voice held a note of uncertainty. He told me at the ministry that the boy would be safe, protected by powerful magic. But will he be loved? Molly asked, and there was a fierce, maternal protectiveness in her voice. Will whoever takes him in love him the way Lily and James would have wanted? Will they tell him about his parents, about how brave they were, about what they sacrificed for him? I don't know, Arthur admitted, but I hope so. Every child deserves that, to know they were loved, to know their parents were heroes. Molly was quiet for a long moment, staring into the candle flame. Then she said, almost to herself, if I ever meet Harry Potter, if our paths ever cross, I'll make sure he knows. I'll make sure he understands what his parents did, how much they loved him. I'll make sure he knows he's not alone, that there are people who remember and honor his family. I know you will, Arthur said, smiling slightly. You've got enough maternal love for half the children in Britain. It's not enough, though, is it? Molly said, and her voice broke again. All the love in the world couldn't save my brothers, couldn't save the Potters, couldn't save any of them. No, Arthur agreed quietly. But love is what they fought for, Molly. Love is what protected Harry Potter when Voldemort tried to kill him. Love is what keeps us going, what gives us the strength to rebuild and move forward. Your brothers died, yes, but they died knowing they were loved. They died surrounded by love, for their family, for their friends, for the world they wanted to create. That matters. That means something. Molly nodded slowly, wiping her eyes one last time. You're right. Of course you're right. She looked at the photographs again, at her brothers' smiling faces. Good night, Gideon. Good night, Fabian. We'll never forget you. We'll make sure the world you fought for is worthy of your sacrifice. She leaned forward and gently blew out the candle. The kitchen was plunged into darkness, save for the dying glow of the fire in the grate. But somehow, the darkness didn't feel oppressive. It felt peaceful, like a blanket settling over the house, protecting it and all who dwelt within. Arthur and Molly climbed the stairs together, checking on each of their sleeping children before retiring to their own room. Outside, the fireworks continued into the early hours of the morning, celebrating the end of an era of darkness and fear. But inside the burrow, the Weasley family slept peacefully, their grief acknowledged and honored, their memories preserved. They had said goodbye to those they'd lost. Tomorrow, they would begin to embrace the future, a future bought with the blood and sacrifice of people like Gideon and Fabian Prewett, like James and Lily Potter, like so many others whose names would be remembered and honored. The war was over. The darkness had lifted. And though the cost had been terrible, there was finally, after so many years, hope. Dawn broke over the wizarding world on the 1st of November, 1981, and it was a dawn unlike any in living memory. The sun rose over a Britain that had, for the first time in 11 years, gone to sleep without fear. No one lay awake wondering if Death Eaters would come in the night. No one checked their wards obsessively, wands clutched beneath pillows. No one whispered prayers for protection against the Dark Lord and his followers. Voldemort was gone. The war was over, and the wizarding world was about to wake up to a reality that felt more like a dream. In Diagon Alley, the crooked shopping street, hidden behind the Leaky Cauldron pub in London, shopkeepers arrived early to find their store windows already crowded with celebrating witches and wizards who had never gone home. They had danced through the streets all night, drunk on butterbeer and fire whiskey and the intoxicating sensation of freedom. Some had collapsed in doorways, sleeping off their revelry, while others were still singing songs of victory as the sun painted the cobblestones gold. Florian Fortescue, proprietor of the ice cream parlor that bore his name, stood in his doorway surveying the scene with a mixture of amusement and wonder. He was a jovial man with a round face and twinkling eyes, and he had seen much in his 63 years. But he had never seen anything quite like this. The street was littered with the remnants of celebration. Streamers in gold and scarlet hung from every lamppost and shop sign. Empty bottles rolled in the gentle morning breeze. Enchanted banners proclaimed the boy who lived and Voldemort defeated in letters that sparkled and changed color. Someone had charmed a flock of paper owls to fly endless circles over the street, each one trailing a message of hope or gratitude. And everywhere, absolutely everywhere, were images of a lightning bolt, the scar, the mark that had, in one impossible moment, changed everything. "Never thought I'd see the day," said a voice beside him. Florian turned to see Fortescue, the owner of Quality Quidditch Supplies, emerging from his own shop. The man looked as though he'd aged 10 years during the war, but this morning there was light in his eyes that had been absent for far too long. 11 years, Florian. 11 years of living in fear, of losing friends and neighbors, of wondering if today would be the day the Dark Lord's followers came for you. And now it's just over. "Not quite over," Florian said quietly, his gaze settling on a witch who sat slumped against the wall of Gringotts Bank, her face buried in her hands. She was weeping, though whether from joy or grief, he couldn't tell. "The war may have ended, but its scars will remain for a long time." "Aye," agreed a new voice. Both men turned to see Ollivander, the wand-maker, approaching from his shop. He was an ancient man with wide, pale eyes that seemed to look through people rather than at them. "The wand chooses the wizard, as you know, and I have sold wands to many who will never return to claim repairs or replacements. The Dark Lord is gone, yes, but he has left behind a world full of orphans, widows, and shattered families." "Always the cheerful one, aren't you, Garrick?" Florian said, but there was no real criticism in his voice. Ollivander spoke the truth, uncomfortable as it was. "I speak of what I observe," Ollivander replied simply. "And what I observe is that while one darkness has ended, we must be vigilant that another does not take its place. Fear, grief, and anger can poison a society as surely as any dark wizard." Before either man could respond, a tremendous crack echoed down the street as someone apparated directly into the middle of Diagon Alley, a flagrant violation of the wards that usually prevented such transportation within the shopping district. But today, it seemed, the normal rules didn't apply. The arrival was Mundungus Fletcher, a squat, bandy-legged wizard with long, straggly ginger hair and bloodshot eyes. He was known throughout the wizarding community as a petty criminal and black market dealer, but even he seemed transformed by the events of the previous night. "Have you heard?" he shouted to anyone who would listen, his voice hoarse from celebration. "He's really gone. You know who. Tried to kill a baby, didn't he? The Potter's boy, and the curse rebounded. Can you believe it? The greatest dark wizard of the age brought down by a toddler." "We've heard, Mundungus," Florian said dryly. "I believe the entire wizarding world has heard by now. But it's bloomin' incredible, innit?" Mundungus continued, undeterred. "I've been down the leaky cauldron all night, and the stories, everyone's got a different version. Some are saying the boy's got special powers, that he's some kind of chosen one. Others reckon it was the mother's love that did it, some ancient magic that the Dark Lord didn't understand." "And what do you think, Mundungus?" asked Ollivander, his pale eyes fixed on the disreputable wizard with unsettling intensity. Mundungus shifted uncomfortably under that gaze. "Me? I think we got lucky, is what I think. I think someone up there was looking out for us, and we'd better not waste this second chance we've been given." "Surprisingly profound, coming from you," muttered the proprietor of Quality Quidditch Supplies. Before Mundungus could take offense, A new sound drew everyone's attention. The distinctive crack, crack, crack of multiple simultaneous apparitions filled the air, and suddenly Diagon Alley was flooded with witches and wizards arriving to begin their day. But unlike normal mornings, where people would hurry to their destinations with heads down and wands ready, today everyone moved slowly, stopping to embrace friends, to share stories, to simply stand in the middle of the street and marvel at the fact that they were alive and free. The Daily Prophet's delivery owls arrived in a great brown and grey cloud, each one carrying copies of what would become the most famous edition in the newspaper's history. The headline, printed in letters so large they took up half the front page, screamed, "The Boy Who Lived." Beneath it was a photograph that had been taken in the early hours of the morning. The ruins of a house in Godric's Hollow, one wall blown completely away, revealing the devastation within. And beside it, an artist's rendering of a baby boy with a lightning-shaped scar on his forehead, sleeping peacefully despite the chaos around him. Florian purchased a copy and read aloud to the gathering crowd. The wizarding world is rejoicing today at the news that he who must not be named has been defeated at last. On the night of October 31st, you-know-who arrived at the home of James and Lily Potter in the village of Godric's Hollow. His intention, it seems, was to kill their 1-year-old son, Harry. For reasons that remain mysterious, the curse rebounded upon you-know-who himself, destroying his physical form and leaving young Harry with nothing more than a lightning-shaped scar upon his forehead. James and Lily Potter died defending their son, and their sacrifice, particularly Lily Potter's choice to die rather than step aside and allow you-know-who to kill her child, appears to have created a protection the Dark Lord could not penetrate. When his curse struck the child, it rebounded with devastating effect. You-know-who's followers, the Death Eaters, are in disarray. Many have been captured by auras in the hours since the Dark Lord's fall. Others have gone into hiding. The Ministry of Magic has urged all witches and wizards to remain vigilant. But Minister Millicent Bagnold has declared that the reign of terror is over, and we can finally begin to rebuild our society. As for young Harry Potter, his whereabouts remain unknown. Albus Dumbledore, Chief Warlock of the Wizengamot and Headmaster of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, has issued a statement saying only that the boy is safe and will be raised away from the fame and notoriety that would otherwise overshadow his childhood. Whatever the future holds for Harry Potter, one thing is certain: his name will echo through history as the child who destroyed the darkest wizard of our age. As Florian finished reading, the crowd around him erupted into fresh cheers and applause. Some were crying openly, overcome with relief and joy. Others were laughing, embracing strangers, dancing in the street. "Where is the boy, though?" someone called out. "Where's the hero? We should be celebrating him." "Dumbledore's hidden him away," another voice answered. "And rightly so. Can you imagine what would happen if everyone knew where to find him? The poor child would never have a moment's peace." "But surely he should know what he's done. Surely he should understand that he's saved us all." "He's 1 year old," Florian said firmly, raising his voice to be heard over the crowd. "He's a baby who has just lost both his parents. What he needs now is not fame and celebration, but safety and love. If Dumbledore has placed him somewhere secure, then we should respect that decision and allow the child to grow up in peace. There were murmurs of agreement, though also some disappointed grumbling from those who had hoped to catch a glimpse of the boy who lived. As the morning wore on, and Diagon Alley filled with more and more celebrating witches and wizards, a pattern began to emerge. Yes, there was joy. Tremendous, overwhelming joy at the defeat of Voldemort and the end of the war. But there was also grief. Families who had lost loved ones to Death Eaters or in the battles against the Dark Lord's forces moved through the crowds with bittersweet expressions. They were grateful for the victory, but they mourned those who hadn't lived to see it. In the offices of the Daily Prophet, high above the street, the staff worked frantically to put together multiple special editions. The editor, Barnabas Cuff, paced behind his desk, barking orders at reporters and photographers who rushed in and out with new information. "I want everything," he shouted. "I want interviews with everyone who knows the Potters. I want details about this protection magic. I want expert analysis on how a killing curse could possibly rebound. And for Merlin's sake, someone finds out where that boy is." "We've tried, sir," said a harried young reporter named Rita Skeeter, her blonde hair disheveled and her quick quotes quill hovering eagerly beside her. "Dumbledore's locked down all information about Harry Potter's location. The Ministry doesn't know, the Aurors don't know, or if they do, they're not talking. It's the most closely guarded secret in Britain." "Then find another angle," Cuff demanded. "Interview the neighbours in Godric's Hollow. Talk to the Potter's friends. Get me something substantial, Rita, or you'll be covering garden gnome infestations for the rest of your career." Rita hurried away, her quill scribbling notes to itself, already composing the dramatic and slightly embellished story that would appear in the next edition. Across the country, in the Tudor-style village of Godric's Hollow, a very different scene was unfolding. The house where James and Lily Potter had died was now the site of a spontaneous memorial. Despite Ministry efforts to secure the area, witches and wizards had been apparating to the village all night, drawn by a need to pay their respects to the family who had given everything. The house itself was a ruin. The explosion of rebounding dark magic had torn through the structure, leaving one wall completely destroyed and the interior exposed like a dollhouse. The second floor, where young Harry's nursery had been, was particularly devastated. Scorch marks blackened the walls, and the roof had partially collapsed. But around the ruins, magic had begun to gather. People had left flowers, magical flowers that would never wilt, that sang soft lullabies or glowed gently in the darkness. Others had left toys for the child who would never return to claim them. Notes of gratitude and sympathy fluttered in the breeze, anchored by sticking charms. An elderly witch named Bathilda Bagshot, who had lived in Godric's Hollow for over a century and had been friends with the Potters, stood before the ruins with tears streaming down her weathered face. She had written the definitive history of magic, had known Dumbledore since he was a boy, had seen the rise and fall of Grindelwald. But nothing in her long life had prepared her for this. "Such a waste," she murmured to herself. "Such a terrible, senseless waste. They were so young, so full of life. And now—" A younger wizard approached, hesitantly offering her a handkerchief. "Did you know them well?" he asked softly. "I knew them," Bathilda confirmed, dabbing at her eyes. "James was like his father, brave to a fault, perhaps too brave for his own good. And Lily. Oh, Lily was special. Brilliant witch, kind heart. She used to come visit me, bring me tea, tell me about little Harry. She loved that boy more than life itself. She proved that, the young wizard said quietly, died to protect him. Yes, Bathilda agreed. And in doing so, she accomplished what all of Dumbledore's armies, all the Ministry's auras, all the bravest witches and wizards in Britain couldn't do. She destroyed Voldemort. The young wizard flinched at the name, but Bathilda continued without seeming to notice. Love, she said, her voice distant and thoughtful. The oldest, most powerful magic of all. We forget that sometimes, in our pursuit of new spells and greater power, we forget that love, true, selfless love, can accomplish miracles. She turned away from the ruins and looked at the young wizard with eyes that held centuries of wisdom. Remember that, young man. Remember what happened here. Not just that a Dark Lord fell, but why he fell. Remember that when you have children of your own, when you make choices about what kind of world you want to build, remember that love is the greatest power of all. The young wizard nodded solemnly, unable to find words adequate to respond. Throughout the day, more and more people came to pay their respects. Some stood in silent contemplation. Others wept openly. A few tried to claim pieces of the ruins as souvenirs, until Bathilda and other residents of Godric's Hollow drove them away with fierce protectiveness. By noon, the Ministry had finally managed to establish a proper perimeter around the Potter house, though they allowed people to leave their tributes and pay their respects from a respectful distance. Auras patrolled the area, watching for Death Eaters who might try to desecrate the site, though none appeared. Voldemort's followers were either in hiding or in custody, their power broken along with their masters. In London, at the Ministry of Magic headquarters, the mood was one of barely controlled chaos. The Department of Magical Law Enforcement was overwhelmed with arrests. Dozens of suspected Death Eaters had been rounded up in the hours since Voldemort's fall. Some had given themselves up voluntarily, hoping for leniency. Others had been captured after attempting to flee the country. The holding cells beneath the Ministry were filled to capacity. Auras moved between them, taking statements, sorting the genuinely dangerous from those who had been coerced or imperished. It was exhausting, emotional work made harder by the fact that many of the auras were still processing their own shock and grief. In the minister's office, Millicent Bagnold sat behind her desk, looking as though she'd aged a decade overnight. She was a stern woman with iron grey hair and a no-nonsense attitude that had served her well during the war years. But today, her carefully maintained composure was cracking. "How many?" she asked her assistant wearily. 43 arrests so far, Minister," the young man replied, consulting his notes. "Another dozen suspected Death Eaters still at large. The Aura Department is working around the clock to track them down." "And Sirius Black?" The assistant's face darkened. "Being held in the highest security cell. The charges against him are extensive. He's accused of being you-know-who's right-hand man, of betraying the Potters to their deaths, and of murdering Peter Pettigrew and 12 muggles in broad daylight." Bagnold closed her eyes. "He was one of our best, James Potter's best friend. How could he have been working for Voldemort all this time?" "No one knows, Minister. He's not talking, just laughing, they say, like he's lost his mind." "Schedule a trial. Bagnold said heavily. Give him a chance to defend himself, at least, though given the evidence. She didn't finish the sentence. They both knew what the outcome would be. Azkaban, probably for life. There was a knock at the door, and Barty Crouch Sr., head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, entered without waiting for permission. He looked grim and determined, his wand hand twitching as if ready to draw at any moment, a habit formed during years of constant vigilance. "Minister," he said curtly, "we have a problem." "Another one?" Bagnold asked with a humorless laugh. "What is it this time?" "The Malfoy family," Crouch said, his voice tight with barely suppressed anger. "Lucius Malfoy has just arrived at the Ministry, claiming he was under the Imperious Curse the entire time he served the Dark Lord. He's brought his solicitors, and he's making a very convincing case." "Convenient," Bagnold said coldly. "How many others will suddenly claim they were impetuous now that it's safe to do so?" "Too many," Crouch replied, "and without sufficient evidence to the contrary, we'll have to give them the benefit of the doubt. The Imperious Curse is unforgivable, but it's also unprovable in most cases. We can't simply lock up everyone who claims they were controlled. So the Malfoys will walk free," Bagnold said bitterly, "along with half of Voldemort's supporters, while the truly innocent remain in their graves." "That's the price of justice," Crouch said, though he looked as unhappy about it as she did. "We must follow the law, even when it's frustrating. Otherwise, we're no better than the Death Eaters we're prosecuting." Bagnold nodded slowly, acknowledging the truth of his words, even as she hated them. "Fine. Process Malfoy's claim according to procedure. But I want him to watch Barty. I want Aurors keeping an eye on him and every other Death Eater who claims they were imperialized. If any of them step out of line, if there's even a hint that they're returning to their old ways, I want them brought back in immediately." "Already arranged," Crouch assured her. After he left, Bagnold sat alone in her office, listening to the sounds of celebration that drifted up from the atrium below. Ministry workers were toasting the end of the war, embracing colleagues, laughing with relief and joy. She wanted to join them, wanted to feel that pure, uncomplicated happiness, but she couldn't, because she knew, as Crouch knew, as Dumbledore surely knew, that this victory was not as complete as it seemed. Voldemort's body might be destroyed, but his ideology lived on in the hearts of those who had followed him. His power structure might be broken, but the pure blood supremacy that had fueled it remained embedded in wizarding society. The war might be over, but the work of healing, of rebuilding, of creating a truly just and equal society, that work was only just beginning. At Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, the castle that had been a beacon of hope throughout the dark years, the students and staff were celebrating in their own way. The Great Hall had been decorated with golden streamers and enchanted candles that spelled out messages of peace and victory. The 4 house tables, Gryffindor, Hufflepuff, Ravenclaw, and Slytherin, were laden with a feast that would have impressed even the house elves who had prepared it. But there was a tension in the air that even the most elaborate celebrations couldn't quite dispel. The Slytherin table was notably quieter than the others, its students acutely aware that many of their parents were either in ministry custody or under suspicion. Some wore defiant expressions, daring anyone to challenge them. Others looked frightened and ashamed, uncertain of their place in this new world. At the staff table, Professor McGonagall sat beside the empty headmaster's chair. Dumbledore had not yet returned from his mysterious errand, and she had managed the school in his absence with her characteristic efficiency. But she was exhausted, both physically and emotionally. The events of the previous night weighed heavily on her mind. She had watched Dumbledore leave that baby on a doorstep and had seen the complete lack of warmth or love in that house. And though she trusted Dumbledore's judgment, though she understood his reasoning about blood protections and ancient magic, she couldn't shake the feeling that they had made a terrible mistake. "Penny for your thoughts, Minerva," asked Professor Flitwick, the tiny charms teacher, from her left. McGonagall forced a smile. "Just thinking about everything that's happened. It's hard to believe it's really over." "Indeed," Flitwick agreed, his usual cheerfulness subdued. "I lost 3 former students in the past month alone. Good witches and wizards, all of them, cut down in their prime. And now we must teach their siblings and children, knowing what was lost. We must teach them to build a better world," McGonagall said firmly. "We must teach them that this victory came at a terrible cost, and that they have a responsibility to make sure it was not in vain." "Well said," came a new voice. Both professors turned to see Dumbledore entering the great hall. He looked older than McGonagall had ever seen him. His shoulders bowed as if carrying an immense weight, but his eyes still held that familiar twinkle, dimmed but not extinguished. The entire hall fell silent as the students noticed the headmaster's arrival. Then, as if by prearranged signal, everyone rose to their feet and began to applaud. The sound was thunderous, echoing off the enchanted ceiling that showed a perfect starry night sky. Dumbledore raised his hands for silence, and gradually the applause died away. "Thank you," he said simply, his voice magically amplified to reach every corner of the hall. "Thank you all, but your applause should not be for me. It should be for every witch and wizard who stood against darkness, who chose courage over fear, who died protecting those they loved. It should be for James and Lily Potter, who gave their lives for their son. It should be for Gideon and Fabian Prewett, for Marlene McKinnon, for Edgar Bones, for Dorcas Meadows, and for countless others whose names deserve to be remembered and honored." He paused, letting his words sink in. When he continued, his voice was softer but no less powerful. "We have won a great victory, yes. Lord Voldemort—" Several students gasped at the name, but Dumbledore continued calmly, "is defeated. But we must not fool ourselves into thinking that darkness itself has been vanquished. Fear, hatred, prejudice, these things still exist in our world. They exist in our society, in our laws, perhaps even in our own hearts. The real work begins now, the work of building a world worthy of the sacrifice so many have made." He looked around the hall, his gaze seeming to rest on each student individually. "You are the future of our world," he said. "Each of you, regardless of your house or your blood status or your family's past. You will decide what kind of society we build from these ashes. You will choose whether to honor the memory of those we've lost by creating something better, or whether to allow the old prejudices and hatreds to take root once more. I know which choice you will make," Dumbledore concluded, and now the twinkle was back in his eyes, stronger than before. "I have faith in you, in all of you. Now, let us feast in celebration of peace and in memory of those who cannot join us." He sat down and gradually conversation resumed throughout the hall, but his words lingered in the air like a spell, challenging each student to be better, to do better, to make their world worthy of the sacrifice that had been paid for their freedom. As November 1st drew to a close and darkness fell once more over Britain, the celebrations finally began to wind down. In Diagon Alley, shopkeepers closed their doors and headed home, exhausted but happy. In Godric's Hollow, the crowds around the Potter House Memorial thinned to a few dedicated watchers. At the ministry, the auras changed shifts, the day team going home to sleep, while the night team took over the processing of captured Death Eaters. And in homes throughout the wizarding world, families gathered together, holding their loved ones close and giving thanks for survival, for peace, for a future that suddenly seemed full of possibility rather than fear. In the burrow, the Weasley children slept soundly, while Molly and Arthur sat by the fire, holding hands and thinking about Molly's brothers, about the Potters, about all they had lost and all they had gained. At Hogwarts, McGonagall finally retired to her chambers, but not before stopping by the window that overlooked the grounds. She gazed out at the peaceful landscape, the forbidden forest dark and mysterious in the distance, the lake reflecting starlight like scattered diamonds. "Sleep well, Harry Potter," she whispered into the night. "Wherever you are, you've saved us all, though you don't know it yet. When you're old enough to understand, I hope you'll know that your parents loved you more than life itself, and that their sacrifice meant something. It meant everything." She turned away from the window, extinguished the candles with a wave of her wand, and went to bed. And far away in Little Whinging, on the doorstep of number 4 Privet Drive, baby Harry Potter slept on, wrapped in blankets and protected by magic he didn't understand. He slept through the dawn that brought Petunia Dursley to her door with a shriek of horror and dismay. He slept as she snatched him up, reading the letter with trembling hands, her face cycling through emotions too complex to name. He slept as Vernon Dursley roared in anger and disbelief, as the couple argued about what to do, whether to keep him or abandon him at an orphanage. And he slept finally as Petunia carried him upstairs to the cupboard under the stairs, not to the second bedroom, which belonged to Dudley, but to a dark, cramped space that smelled of dust and cleaning supplies. The boy who lived had found his new home, and the world that celebrated his name had no idea of the price he would pay for their peace. The morning of November the 1st arrived at number 4 Privet Drive with its usual suburban precision. The sun rose over identical rooftops, casting long shadows across perfectly trimmed lawns. Milk bottles clinked on doorsteps as the milkman made his rounds. Somewhere down the street, a dog barked and a car engine turned over with a reluctant cough. Inside number 4, Vernon Dursley's alarm clock shrilled at exactly 6:30, as it did every weekday morning. He slapped it silent with a meaty hand and sat up in bed, his walrus-like mustache bristling as he yawned. Beside him, Petunia was already awake, staring at the ceiling with an expression that combined horror, resentment, and something that might have been fear. "Maybe it was a dream," Vernon said hopefully, though his voice lacked conviction. "Maybe we imagined the whole thing." "Go look in the cupboard under the stairs," Petunia replied flatly. "Then tell me if it was a dream." Vernon heaved himself out of bed with a grunt, his considerable bulk making the floorboards creak. He pulled on his dressing gown, purple silk that had been expensive, but did nothing to improve his appearance, and shuffled out of the bedroom. Petunia heard him descending the stairs, heard the cupboard door open with a squeak that needed oiling, heard his sharp intake of breath. "Petunia," he bellowed, "it's still here. The thing is still here." "His name is Harry," Petunia said coldly, appearing at the top of the stairs. "And he's not a thing. He's my sister's son." She descended the stairs with rigid dignity, her thin face set in hard lines. She had spent most of the night lying awake, remembering things she had spent years trying to forget. Her sister Lily, with her impossible green eyes and her unnatural abilities. The letter from that school, Hogwarts, accepting Lily and rejecting Petunia's desperate application. The growing distance between them as Lily disappeared into a world of magic and wonder, while Petunia remained determinedly, resentfully normal. And now, Lily was dead, murdered by one of her own kind in that freakish world she'd chosen over her family. And she had left behind a son who would doubtless prove to be just as freakish, just as abnormal, just as much a reminder of everything Petunia had tried to escape. Vernon had pulled the bundle from the cupboard and was holding it at arm's length, as if it might explode. The baby had woken and was making soft, confused sounds. His green eyes, Lily's eyes, Petunia noticed, with a painful twist in her chest, blinking in the sudden light. "We can't keep it," Vernon said firmly. "We'll take it to an orphanage or a police station. Let them deal with it." "And tell them what?" Petunia snapped. "That we found a baby on our doorstep? They'll ask questions, Vernon. They'll want to know why someone left him here. They'll investigate. Do you want police poking around, asking about my sister and her husband?" Vernon's face turned an alarming shade of purple. "Well, we can't just keep it. What about Dudley? What about our reputation? What will the neighbors think?" "The neighbors will think we've taken in my orphaned nephew," Petunia said, snatching the bundle from Vernon's arms. Harry made a small sound of protest, and she automatically adjusted her grip, supporting his head the way some long-buried instinct told her to. "We'll say his parents died in a car crash. It's practically the truth." "But the boy's Vernon couldn't bring himself to say the word, as if speaking it might somehow make the situation more real. "A freak," Petunia finished for him, her voice bitter. "Yes, like my sister, like that Potter man she married. But he's also a baby, Vernon, a 1-year-old child who's just lost both his parents. We can't just abandon him." Vernon's mustache quivered with indignation. "Why not? His sort abandoned normal society long enough. Let them take care of their own problems." Petunia opened her mouth to argue, then closed it again. She couldn't explain to Vernon, couldn't explain to herself, why she felt compelled to keep the child. Perhaps it was the letter from Albus Dumbledore, with its grave warnings about dark wizards and protective magic. Perhaps it was some vestigial sense of family obligation. Or perhaps, and this thought made her most uncomfortable of all, it was because when she looked at Harry's face, she saw her sister and felt a grief she had thought herself incapable of feeling. "The letter says he has to stay here," she said finally, falling back on Dumbledore's words. "It says there's some sort of protection, some magic that will keep him safe as long as this is his home. If we send him away, that protection fails. And if it fails—" She swallowed hard. "The letter says there are people who would want to hurt him. People like the one who killed Lily." Vernon's face went from purple to white. You mean there might be more of them? More of those terrorists? I don't know, Petunia admitted. But the letter was very clear. The boy stays here, or the boy is in danger. And if he's in danger, we might be too. They know where we live, Vernon. They left him on our doorstep. They know exactly where we live. The implication hung in the air between them. Vernon's practical, business-minded brain quickly calculated the risk. If refusing the child meant potentially attracting the attention of murderous wizards. Fine, he said at last, though he looked as if he'd swallowed something unpleasant. Fine, but I'm not having any funny business in my house, do you understand? No magic, no freakishness. We'll raise him normally, if that's even possible. And he's not to mention his parents or where he came from to anyone. As far as the world is concerned, his parents were normal people who died in a normal car crash. Agreed, Petunia said, though something in her chest tightened at the thought of denying Lily entirely, of erasing her sister's existence as if she'd never been. Harry, oblivious to the discussion about his fate, had discovered his thumb and was sucking on it contentedly. His dark hair stood up in all directions, and the peculiar scar on his forehead was clearly visible now in the morning light. A perfect lightning bolt, as if someone had drawn it there with a fine-tipped pen. "What about that?" Vernon asked, pointing at the scar with distaste. "People will ask questions." "We'll say it's from the car crash," Petunia replied. "A piece of flying glass or metal. It'll be a reminder to him of what happens when you associate with their sort." She carried Harry into the kitchen and set him down in Dudley's old high chair, which was still in storage in the garage. It took Vernon 3 trips to find it and set it up, muttering complaints under his breath the entire time. Dudley himself was still asleep upstairs, and Petunia was grateful for the delay before she'd have to explain to her son why there was suddenly another child in the house. Harry watched the proceedings with wide, solemn eyes. He was an unnaturally quiet baby, Petunia noticed. Didn't cry or fuss despite being hungry and in need of a change. He simply observed, taking in this new environment with an alertness that seemed unusual for a child his age. "Right," Vernon said, once Harry was secured in the high chair. "I'm going to work. Got that meeting with the Grunnings directors. Can't miss it. You'll sort all this out?" "Yes, Vernon," Petunia said wearily. "I'll sort it out." After Vernon left, driving away in his company car with rather more speed than usual, as if fleeing the scene of a crime, Petunia stood in her kitchen and looked at the child who had just upended her carefully ordered life. Harry looked back at her with Lily's eyes. "I don't know how to do this," Petunia said aloud, though whether she was talking to Harry or to the ghost of her sister, she couldn't say. "I don't know how to raise you. I don't know how to love you when you remind me so much of everything I tried to forget." Harry tilted his head, as if considering her words, then reached out one small hand toward her. Petunia felt something crack inside her chest. Not break, but crack, like ice beginning to thaw. She reached out and let Harry's tiny fingers curl around one of hers. His grip was surprisingly strong for such a small child. "But I'll try," she whispered. "For Lily's sake, if nothing else. I'll try." The moment of softness passed quickly. Petunia withdrew her hand and busied herself with the practical matters of caring for an infant, finding old baby bottles, sterilizing them, preparing formula. She changed Harry's nappy with brisk efficiency, trying not to think about how Lily would have done this, would have cooed and sung to her baby, while Petunia could only manage a grim silence. When Dudley finally woke and came waddling downstairs in his footy pajamas, he stopped dead at the sight of Harry in his old high chair. "Who's that?" he demanded, his face already beginning to turn red, a warning sign Petunia knew well. "This is your cousin Harry," Petunia said, forcing brightness into her voice. "He's going to be staying with us for a while. His parents had an accident, so he needs a family to take care of him." "Don't want him here," Dudley announced, lower lip jutting out. "Send him away." "We can't do that, Duddykins," Petunia said, scooping Dudley up despite his considerable weight and settling him at the table. "He's family. Family takes care of each other." "But he's in my chair," Dudley whined, pointing at the high chair. "You're too big for that chair now," Petunia assured him. "You're a big boy. Big boys sit at the table like Daddy does." This seemed to mollify Dudley somewhat, though he continued to shoot suspicious glares at Harry throughout breakfast. Harry, for his part, seemed largely indifferent to Dudley's presence. He ate the mashed banana Petunia had prepared without complaint, though he made a terrible mess of it, smearing it across his face and the high chair tray. As Petunia cleaned up the mess, she found herself thinking about the letter Dumbledore had left. She'd hidden it in her jewelry box, unable to throw it away, but unwilling to leave it where Vernon might find it and read it again. The words haunted her. "Your sister's sacrifice has created a powerful protection around the boy. As long as he can call your house his home, he will be safe from those who wish him harm. But he must know love, Petunia. He must know that he is wanted and valued. Without that, the protection may weaken, and all will have been for nothing." Love. How was she supposed to love this child when his very existence was a reminder of everything she'd lost, everything she'd never had? Lily had been the special one, the magical one, the one everyone admired and celebrated. Petunia had been the ordinary sister, the forgettable one, the one left behind. And now she was expected to raise Lily's son, to give him the love and care that Lily herself would have provided if she'd lived. The unfairness of it all made Petunia's throat tight with unshed tears. The first few days passed in a blur of adjustment and routine. Petunia established Harry in the cupboard under the stairs. It was small, yes, but it was the only space available with Dudley occupying both spare bedrooms, one for sleeping, one for his toys and games. She told herself it was temporary, that once Harry was older, they'd figure out a better arrangement. For now, the cupboard would do. It was dry and relatively clean, and she'd put in a small cot and some blankets. Harry didn't seem to mind, or if he did, he didn't show it. He remained that eerily quiet child, rarely crying, rarely demanding attention. He seemed to understand, on some instinctive level, that he was not entirely wanted here, that his presence was tolerated rather than celebrated. The neighbors were told the story about the car crash, and they responded with appropriate sympathy and praise for the Dursleys' generosity in taking in the orphan child. Vernon basked in this approval, though he made sure to emphasize to everyone who would listen that it was a temporary arrangement, that they were looking for a more suitable permanent home for the boy. But as weeks passed, and then months, temporary began to feel permanent. Petunia found herself falling into a routine with Harry. She fed him, changed him, put him down for naps. She did these things without affection, but also without cruelty, simply as tasks that needed doing, like washing dishes or vacuuming carpets. Harry was another chore on her endless list of household duties, neither more nor less important than the others. Vernon, for his part, largely ignored Harry's existence. He refused to hold the baby, refused to help with his care, refused to even acknowledge him most of the time. When Harry cried, which he rarely did, Vernon would leave the room, muttering about the noise and the disruption to his peaceful home. Dudley, however, was a different story. As the weeks passed, and Dudley realized that Harry wasn't going away, his initial suspicion curdled into something darker. He began to view Harry as a rival, someone competing for his parents' attention and resources. Never mind that Petunia showered Dudley with 10 times the attention she gave Harry, or that Vernon bought Dudley new toys weekly while Harry made do with Dudley's broken cast-offs. In Dudley's mind, Harry's mere presence was theft. He began to pinch Harry when Petunia wasn't looking, to push him over when he was learning to walk, to grab toys from Harry's hands and claim they were his. Petunia noticed, of course. She noticed everything in her house, but she rarely intervened. Boys would be boys, she told herself. It would toughen Harry up, teach him his place. Deep down, in a part of herself, she refused to acknowledge. She knew she was allowing Dudley's cruelty because it eased some of her own resentment. Every pinch Dudley gave Harry, every toy he snatched away, was a small act of revenge against Lily, against magic, against the unfairness of a world that had given her sister everything and left Petunia with nothing. By December, winter had settled over Little Whinging with its characteristic grey dampness. Christmas decorations appeared on houses up and down Privet Drive, tasteful white lights and wreaths on some homes, garish inflatable Santas and reindeer on others. The Dursleys, as always, struck a balance between festive and respectable, with a modest wreath on the door and white lights along the gutters. Inside number 4, preparations for Dudley's second Christmas were in full swing. Vernon had purchased so many presents that they filled half the living room. Petunia had baked enough mince pies and Christmas pudding to feed the entire street. Everything was perfect, exactly as a proper British Christmas should be, except for the 1-year-old living in the cupboard under the stairs. Harry's first Christmas at the Dursleys passed with little acknowledgement. Petunia bought him one small present, a pack of plain white onesies, wrapped it in newspaper, and placed it on the floor of his cupboard. No stocking hung for him. No special meal was prepared with him in mind. While Dudley gorged himself on chocolate and tore through presents with gleeful abandon, Harry sat in his high chair with a bowl of plain porridge, watching the proceedings with those unnervingly intelligent green eyes. "Don't look at me like that," Petunia snapped at one point, when Harry's gaze became too much to bear. "You should be grateful you're here at all. Grateful we took you in when we could have left you on the doorstep for anyone to find." Harry said nothing. He was too young for words yet, but something in his expression made Petunia turn away, her cheeks burning with shame she refused to name. That night, after Dudley had been put to bed in his room surrounded by new toys, and Vernon had fallen asleep in his armchair with a belly full of turkey and wine, Petunia went to the cupboard under the stairs. She opened the door quietly and looked in at Harry, who was lying in his cot, wide awake despite the late hour. Your mother loved Christmas, Petunia said softly, the words escaping before she could stop them. When we were girls, she would stay up all night on Christmas Eve, too excited to sleep. She'd wake me up at dawn, bouncing on my bed, dragging me downstairs to see what Father Christmas had brought. Harry watched her, unblinking. She had a gift, Petunia continued, her voice barely above a whisper, for making everything seem magical, even before we knew she actually was magic. She could make the ordinary seem extraordinary. A walk in the park became an adventure. A rainy day became an opportunity to splash in puddles and catch raindrops on your tongue. She had joy, real joy, the kind I never quite managed. Petunia's hand moved to the doorframe, gripping it tightly. I was jealous of her, she admitted. So jealous it ate me up inside. And when that letter came, when she went off to that school and left me behind, I told myself I didn't care. I told myself her world was freakish and wrong, that I was better off without it. But the truth was, I wanted it too. I wanted to be special. I wanted to be chosen. A single tear rolled down Petunia's cheek. She wiped it away angrily. And now she's gone. And you're here. And I don't know what to do with you. I don't know how to give you what she would have given you. I don't know how to be what you need. Harry reached out toward her, his small hand opening and closing. For a moment, Petunia considered reaching back, taking his hand, letting herself feel something for this child who carried her sister's eyes. But the moment passed. She stepped back and closed the cupboard door, leaving Harry in darkness. "Good night," she said through the door. "Merry Christmas." She walked upstairs to her bedroom, got into bed beside her snoring husband, and cried silently into her pillow for the sister she'd lost and the chance at redemption she'd just let slip away. In the cupboard under the stairs, Harry lay in his cot and stared at the darkness. At 1 year old, he couldn't understand the words Petunia had spoken, couldn't grasp the complex emotions behind them, but he understood tone, understood feeling. He understood that he was alone. Something flickered in the darkness, a faint, warm glow that seemed to come from Harry himself, from the lightning-shaped scar on his forehead. It lasted only a moment, barely visible, a tiny spark of magic responding to his unconscious distress. Then it was gone, and Harry was alone in the dark once more. He closed his eyes and slept, dreaming of things he couldn't possibly remember. A woman's gentle voice singing a lullaby, a man's laughter, warm arms holding him close. Dreams of love from a life that had ended in green light and screams. When he woke, the dreams would be forgotten. But some part of him, some deep, essential part, would remember, would know that he had been loved once, even if he couldn't recall it consciously. And that knowledge, buried deep in his heart, would sustain him through the long, lonely years to come. Outside number 4 Privet Drive, the night was cold and still. The Christmas lights twinkled cheerfully, and somewhere in the distance, church bells rang out Christmas carols. The world was at peace, saved by a baby who slept in a cupboard, unloved and unknown. In the wizarding world, Harry Potter's name was on everyone's lips. Stories about the boy who lived had already taken on mythical proportions. Children went to bed dreaming of the heroic baby who had defeated the darkest wizard of the age. Parents toasted his name and gave thanks for his existence. But none of them knew where he was. None of them knew that the child they celebrated was sleeping in a cupboard, that the family caring for him did so out of obligation rather than love, that his first Christmas had passed with barely an acknowledgement of his existence. Dumbledore knew, of course. He had placed monitoring charms around Privet Drive, subtle spells that would alert him if Harry was in immediate physical danger. But emotional neglect, coldness, the slow withering of a child's spirit, these things didn't trigger his alarms. He told himself that Harry was safe, that the blood protection was working, that some discomfort now was worth the security it provided. He told himself that love couldn't be forced, that Petunia would come around in time, that Harry would be fine. He told himself many things, and late at night, in his office at Hogwarts, he sometimes wondered if any of them were true. But he had made his choice. The boy would stay at Privet Drive, would grow up away from fame and expectation, would have a chance at a normal childhood. That was what he told himself. That was what he needed to believe. Back in the cupboard under the stairs, Harry Potter, the boy who lived, the chosen one, the child who had saved the wizarding world, slept on in darkness, unaware of his fame, unaware of his importance, unaware that he was loved and celebrated by thousands who would never know that the hero they worshipped was spending his first Christmas in a cupboard under the stairs. The night deepened. The house grew quiet, and in the darkness of that cramped space, Harry dreamed of green eyes and gentle hands, of love he couldn't remember, but somehow still knew existed, somewhere in the world that had forgotten him. Christmas passed into Boxing Day. The decorations would come down in a week. Life would return to its normal rhythm, and Harry would continue to grow in the shadow of his cousin, in the coldness of his aunt's resentment, in the absence of his uncle's attention. He would grow up not knowing who he really was, not knowing what he had done, not knowing that he was already a legend. He would grow up alone, and the world that owed him everything would never know the price he paid for their peace. The snow fell gently over Britain as December gave way to the new year of 1982. It was the first new year in over a decade that wizarding families could celebrate without fear, without wondering if they would survive to see another. In homes across the country, witches and wizards raised their glasses at midnight, toasting to peace, to freedom, to the boy who lived. But for some, the celebrations were muted. For those who had lost loved ones in the war, the victory was bittersweet, a reminder of all they had sacrificed, all they would never get back. In a small, secure room deep within the Ministry of Magic, Barty Crouch Sr. sat across from Sirius Black and felt his certainty crumbling like sand beneath his feet. The prisoner had been in custody for 2 months now, held without trial in accordance with emergency wartime powers that Crouch himself had championed. At first, Black had seemed mad, laughing hysterically, muttering incoherently, his aristocratic features twisted into something barely recognizable. The auras who guarded him reported that he alternated between wild laughter and deathly silence, that he barely ate, that he seemed to have lost his mind entirely. But today, when Crouch had come to question him one final time before the trial scheduled for the following week, he had found a different man. Sirius Black sat in his chair with his hands shackled before him, his grey eyes clear and focused for the first time since his arrest. He was painfully thin, his once handsome face gaunt and stubbled, but there was an intelligence in his gaze that had been absent before. "Mr. Black," Crouch began formally, his wand trained on the prisoner, though he sat across a heavily warded table. "You have been charged with the murder of Peter Pettigrew and 12 muggles, with betraying James and Lily Potter to he who must not be named, and with being a Death Eater in service to the Dark Lord. Do you have anything to say in your defense?" Sirius laughed, but it was a bitter, broken sound, nothing like the manic cackling the Auras had reported. Defense? What defense could I possibly offer against charges that everyone has already decided are true? The great Barty Crouch doesn't make mistakes, does he? Once you've decided someone is guilty, that's the end of it. "The evidence against you is substantial," Crouch said coldly, though something in Black's tone made him uneasy. "You are the Potter's secret keeper. You are the only one who could have betrayed their location. Peter Pettigrew confronted you about your betrayal, and you murdered him along with 12 innocent muggles. Witnesses saw you laughing over the destruction you caused." "Did those witnesses hear what I was laughing about?" Sirius asked, leaning forward. His chains clinked against the table. "Did they hear what I said?" "You were heard to say, 'I killed them. I killed them all,'" Crouch recited from the report in front of him. "And did anyone stop to ask who them referred to?" Sirius demanded, his voice rising. "Did anyone think to question whether I was confessing to killing the muggles, or whether I was taking responsibility for something else entirely?" Crouch's eyes narrowed. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm not suggesting anything," Sirius said, slumping back in his chair. "What would be the point? You've already made up your mind. The whole wizarding world has made up its mind. Sirius Black, the last of the ancient and noble House of Black, finally showed his true colors, finally proved he was just like the rest of his pure-blood supremacist family. It makes sense, doesn't it? It fits perfectly with everyone's expectations." "Then tell me what actually happened," Crouch said, and despite himself, there was a note of genuine curiosity in his voice. "Tell me your version of events." Sirius was quiet for a long moment, staring at his shackled hands. When he finally spoke, his voice was hoarse with suppressed emotion. "I wasn't their secret keeper," he said simply. "We switched. At the last minute, we switched. I convinced James to make Peter the secret keeper instead of me, because everyone would assume I had the honor. I thought it would be clever, you see. I thought it would throw off anyone who came looking. The arrogant Sirius Black, James's best friend. Of course he would be the secret keeper. Who would suspect shy, timid Peter Pettigrew?" He laughed again, that same bitter sound. "I was so proud of myself, so clever, and I killed them with my cleverness, killed them as surely as if I'd cast the curse myself." Crouch felt a chill run down his spine. "You're saying Peter Pettigrew was the secret keeper? That he betrayed the Potters?" "Peter was the spy," Sirius confirmed, his voice breaking. "He'd been working for Voldemort for over a year, feeding him information about the Order of the Phoenix. We suspected there was a spy, but we never imagined it could be Peter. Sweet, harmless, hero-worshipping Peter. He was so good at playing the loyal friend, the grateful hanger-on, and all the while, he was selling us out to the Dark Lord." "These are serious accusations," Crouch said, though his mind was racing. "Do you have any proof?" "Proof?" Sirius's laugh was harsh. "What proof could I possibly have? Peter was careful. He met with Death Eaters in secret, passing information through dead drops. The only proof is that he was the secret keeper. and he betrayed that secret. James and Lily are dead because Peter told Voldemort where to find them. And the murders? Crouch pressed. The explosion that killed 12 muggles and supposedly killed Pettigrew himself? Peter cast that curse, Sirius said, his hands clenching into fists. I tracked him down after I heard about James and Lily. I wasn't thinking clearly. I was half mad with grief and rage. I should have brought him in for questioning, should have let the auras handle it. But all I could think about was that he had killed them. My best friend. My brother is everything but blood. And Lily, who'd been so kind to me, who had made James promise to be friends with me no matter what my family was like. And baby Harry, who I was supposed to protect as his godfather. His voice cracked, and he had to stop for a moment to compose himself. I cornered Peter in that muggle street. I shouted at him, accusing him of betrayal. And he was brilliant. He shouted back, loud enough for everyone to hear, crying out about how I had betrayed James and Lily. He called me a murderer. And then, before I could react, he blew up the street. He cut off his own finger, transformed into a rat, and disappeared down the sewer while I stood there in shock, surrounded by dead muggles and destruction. And everyone who heard him, everyone who saw what happened, assumed I was the murderer. Because why else would I be laughing? And why were you laughing? Crouch asked quietly. Sirius met his eyes, and Crouch saw in them a pain so profound it was almost unbearable to witness. Because I suddenly understood how perfectly Peter had planned it, Sirius said softly. How thoroughly he had won. He had killed James and Lily. He had killed those muggles. And he had made sure that I would take the blame for all of it. I would rot in Azkaban while he went free. And Harry, little Harry, who I swore to protect, would grow up thinking his godfather had betrayed his parents. The irony was so perfect, so complete, that I couldn't help but laugh. I laughed because if I didn't laugh, I would have screamed until my throat bled. The room fell silent. Crouch looked down at the report in front of him, at the neat, certain handwriting that declared Sirius Black guilty of all charges. For the first time since his appointment as head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, he felt doubt. Why didn't you tell anyone this before? He asked. Would it have mattered? Sirius replied tiredly. Would anyone have listened? The entire wizarding world watched me stand over the destruction Peter caused. They heard me laughing. They heard him accuse me before he disappeared. What are my words against that evidence? Especially when those words come from a Black, from a family known for dark magic and pure blood mania. Who would believe me? I might, Crouch said slowly. If what you're saying is true, if Peter Pettigrew is alive and in hiding, he's a rat, Sirius interrupted. An unregistered animagus. That was our secret, mine and James's and Peter's and Remus's. We all learned to transform in our school years to keep Remus company during his transformations. Peter's form is a rat, perfectly suited for hiding, for spying, for scurrying away from responsibility. He could be anywhere. He could be living with a wizarding family, pretending to be their pet. He could be in Nocturne Alley, living in the sewers. Finding him would be nearly impossible. Crouch sat back in his chair, his mind working furiously. If Black was telling the truth, and the man's desperate sincerity was convincing, then they had imprisoned an innocent man while allowing the real traitor to escape. It was a miscarriage of justice that would haunt the ministry for years if it ever came to light. But more than that, it would mean that Peter Pettigrew, a Death Eater and murderer, was still at large, still free to cause harm. "I need time to investigate this," Crouch said finally. "Your trial is scheduled for next week. I'll request a postponement while we look into your claims." "Will you?" Sirius asked, and there was no hope in his voice, only weary resignation. "Or will you decide that it's easier to convict me and close the case? The war is over, after all. People want closure. They want to see Death Eaters punished. I'm a convenient scapegoat." "I am many things," Crouch said coldly, rising from his chair. "But I am not a man who knowingly convicts the innocent. If you are telling the truth, if Peter Pettigrew is indeed the guilty party, then justice will be served. But if you are lying, if this is some elaborate attempt to escape punishment, then you will spend the rest of your life in Azkaban. Do I make myself clear?" "Perfectly," Sirius said. He looked up at Crouch with those grey eyes that had seen too much. "But don't waste too much time investigating. Harry needs someone. He needs a family. If I'm stuck in here, who's looking after him? Where is he? Dumbledore said he would be safe. But where? With whom?" "That information is classified," Crouch said automatically. "He's my godson," Sirius shouted, surging to his feet. The chains yanked him back down, and he winced with pain. "I have a right to know where he is. I have a right to make sure he's being cared for properly." "You have no rights," Crouch said flatly. "You are a prisoner awaiting trial. Until you are cleared of all charges, if you are cleared, you have no legal standing regarding the boy or anyone else." He left the room, leaving Sirius alone with his chains and his grief. But as Crouch walked through the corridors of the Ministry, heading back to his office, he couldn't shake the conversation from his mind. He had built his career on certainty, on the unwavering conviction that he could identify guilt and punish it without mercy. But now, for the first time, he wondered if he had been wrong. And if he had been wrong about Sirius Black, what else might he have been wrong about? Far from the Ministry, in a cottage on the outskirts of a small village in Yorkshire, Remus Lupin sat by his fire and stared into the flames. He was a young man, not yet 30, but he looked older, worn down by years of living as a werewolf, by the poverty that came with being unable to hold steady employment, by the losses he had suffered in the war. James and Lily were dead. Peter was dead. And Sirius, his friend and fellow marauder, was a traitor who had sold out James and Lily to Voldemort. Remus couldn't make sense of it. He had known Sirius since they were 11 years old, had watched him choose to be different from his family, had seen him turn his back on dark magic and pure blood supremacy. Sirius had been James's best friend, had loved him like a brother. How could he have betrayed them? But the evidence was overwhelming. Sirius had been their secret keeper. He was the only one who could have given Voldemort their location. And when Peter had confronted him, Sirius had murdered him along with 12 innocent muggles. It didn't make sense, and yet it must be true, because what other explanation could there be? Remus had isolated himself since learning of the betrayal. He couldn't face the pitying looks from former Order members, couldn't bear their careful questions about whether he had suspected anything. He had retreated to this cottage, accepting the charity of an old family friend who pitied him enough to offer him a place to stay. Tomorrow was the full moon. He had already prepared the cellar, reinforced the walls with every protective spell he knew. He would transform alone as he had done so many times before. James and Sirius and Peter had learned to become animagi to keep him company. He would be alone again, as he had been before Hogwarts, before friendship, before he had learned what it meant to be accepted, despite his condition. A knock at the door startled him from his thoughts. He wasn't expecting visitors. He never expected visitors. Cautiously, wand in hand, he approached the door and opened it. Albus Dumbledore stood on his doorstep, looking older than Remus remembered, but with that same gentle smile and those same twinkling blue eyes. "Remus," Dumbledore said warmly, "may I come in?" Remus stepped aside, still too shocked to speak. Dumbledore entered, looking around the small, shabby cottage with no judgment in his expression. He settled into the armchair opposite Remus's, conjuring a second cup of tea from thin air. "I apologize for the intrusion," Dumbledore said, "but I felt we needed to speak. You have been alone with your grief for too long, I think." "I don't know what to say to you, Professor," Remus admitted, sinking back into his chair. "I don't know what to say to anyone. Everything I thought I knew about my friends was a lie." "Was it?" Dumbledore asked gently. "Or is it possible that the lie is in what you believe to be true now?" Remus looked up sharply. "What do you mean?" "I mean," Dumbledore said carefully, "that I have had 2 months to think about what happened. 2 months to consider the evidence, to examine my own assumptions. And I find that I am not entirely convinced of Sirius Black's guilt." "But he was their secret keeper," Remus protested. "He was the only one who could have betrayed them." "Was he?" Dumbledore asked. "I was not told who the secret keeper was. James insisted on keeping that information private, even from me. I assumed, as everyone else did, that it was Sirius. But what if we were all wrong? What if the secret keeper was someone else?" Remus felt his heart beginning to pound. "You think Peter—" "I think," Dumbledore interrupted gently, "that we may have been deceived. I think Peter Pettigrew may have been far more cunning than any of us gave him credit for. And I think Sirius Black may be innocent of the crimes for which he has been imprisoned. But the evidence is circumstantial," Dumbledore said. "Sirius was seen at the scene of Peter's supposed death. He was heard to make statements that could be interpreted as a confession. But there was no trial, Remus. No opportunity for him to defend himself. In our rush to find someone to blame, to punish someone for the deaths of James and Lily, we may have imprisoned an innocent man." Remus felt as though the ground was shifting beneath him. If Sirius is innocent, if Peter is the traitor, then we've left a Death Eater free while locking up our friend. We've failed everyone. Failed James and Lily, failed Sirius, failed Harry. "Yes," Dumbledore agreed softly. "That is precisely what we may have done. Which is why I am here, Remus. I am working with Barty Crouch to re-examine the evidence, to see if there is any way to prove Sirius's innocence. But I need your help. You knew Peter as well as anyone. You knew all the Marauders. If anyone can help us understand what really happened, it is you." Remus stood and moved to the window, looking out at the dark Yorkshire countryside. His mind was racing, remembering conversations, moments, small details that had seemed insignificant at the time. "Peter was always the weakest of us," he said slowly. "Not in a cruel way. We never mocked him for it. But he was insecure, always seeking approval, always wanting to be part of something bigger than himself. He hero-worshipped James and Sirius. followed them everywhere, and laughed at all their jokes. The perfect qualities for a spy, Dumbledore observed. Someone who is overlooked, underestimated, someone who people don't think to suspect. But surely someone would have noticed, Remus protested. Surely there would have been signs. Would there? Dumbledore asked. Peter was an animagus, was he not? An unregistered one, if I recall correctly. A rat. An excellent form for eavesdropping, for spying, for being present in places he shouldn't be without anyone noticing. Remus turned from the window, his face pale. Oh God, the meetings. Peter was always there, always in the background. He would have heard everything, every order plan, every safe house location, every strategy we discussed. And we never suspected him because he was just Peter. Harmless, bumbling Peter. Precisely, Dumbledore said. Which is why, if Sirius is telling the truth, Peter would have been the perfect spy, and why he would have been motivated to ensure Sirius took the blame for his crimes. Who would suspect the dead man? Except he's not dead, Remus said, and his voice was hardening with anger. He's out there somewhere, hiding as a rat, living free while Sirius rots in a cell, while Harry grows up without his godfather. He turned to face Dumbledore fully. What do you need me to do? I need you to think, Dumbledore said. Think about everywhere Peter might go, everyone he might turn to. Think about his habits, his hiding places, his patterns. If we can find him, if we can prove he's alive, then we can exonerate Sirius and bring the real traitor to justice. And what about Harry? Remus asked. Where is he? Is he safe? Is he happy? Dumbledore's expression became guarded. Harry is as safe as I can make him. He is with family, protected by powerful magic. With family, Remus repeated. You mean with Lily's sister, with Petunia Dursley? Yes. Lily hated her sister, Remus said flatly. She never spoke about it much, but I could tell. The few times Petunia's name came up, Lily would get this look, hurt and angry and sad all at once. Are you sure that's the right place for Harry? It is the only place, Dumbledore said firmly. The blood protection created by Lily's sacrifice is strongest with her blood relatives. As long as Petunia provides Harry with a home, he is protected from Voldemort's followers in a way no other magic could provide. But will she love him? Remus asked, his voice breaking. Will she treat him the way James and Lily would have wanted? Or will she see him as a burden, a reminder of the sister she resented? Dumbledore was silent for a long moment. I have taken precautions, he said finally. I have monitoring charms in place. If Harry is in physical danger, I will know. Physical danger, Remus repeated. But what about emotional harm? What about neglect? What about growing up feeling unwanted and unloved? Sometimes, Dumbledore said softly, we must make difficult choices. Sometimes we must accept imperfect solutions because the alternatives are worse. Would you rather Harry grew up famous, celebrated, unable to live a normal life? Would you rather he grew up in the wizarding world, surrounded by people who see him as the boy who lived rather than as simply Harry? I would rather he grew up loving, Remus said quietly. So would I, Dumbledore agreed. But we cannot always have what we want, Remus. We can only do our best with the options available to us. I must believe, that I have made the right choice for Harry, that he will be better off growing up away from fame, with the chance to be a normal child before he learns what he did, what he represents. Remus wanted to argue further, but he could see the weariness in Dumbledore's eyes, the weight of responsibility that sat on those ancient shoulders. The man had made his choice, and nothing Remus said would change it now. "I'll help you find Peter," Remus said instead. "I'll do whatever it takes to clear Sirius's name and bring the real traitor to justice, for James and Lily, for Harry, for all of us who lost so much in this war." "Thank you, Remus," Dumbledore said, rising from his chair. "I knew I could count on you. Together, we will see that justice is done." After Dumbledore left, Remus sat alone in his cottage and thought about his friends. About James, who had died protecting his family. About Lily, whose love had saved her son. About Sirius, possibly innocent and imprisoned. About Peter, possibly guilty and free. And about Harry, somewhere out there, growing up without knowing how much he'd been loved, how much he was still loved by those who remained. "I'll find him," Remus whispered to the empty room. "Someday, somehow, I'll find Harry. And I'll make sure he knows about his parents, about how brave they were, about how much they loved him. I'll make sure he knows he wasn't abandoned, that he has people who care about him." It was a promise he would carry with him through the long, lonely years ahead. A promise that would sustain him through transformations and poverty and isolation. A promise that would one day bring him back into Harry Potter's life, when the boy most needed someone who remembered his parents with love rather than legend. And so the first winter after Voldemort's fall passed into spring. The snow melted, revealing grass that was greener than anyone remembered. Flowers bloomed in gardens that had been neglected during the war years. Children played in streets where Death Eaters had once prowled. The wizarding world began to heal. But healing is not the same as forgetting. In homes across Britain, photographs of the fallen looked down from mantelpieces, their subjects waving and smiling, forever young, forever lost. In the ministry, debates raged about how to punish Death Eaters, how to rebuild society, and how to ensure that such darkness never rose again. And in a cupboard under the stairs at number 4 Privet Drive, a small boy with a lightning-shaped scar slept through the changing seasons, unaware that the world outside his prison was celebrating his name, unaware that he had already saved them all, unaware that he was destined for greatness whether he wanted it or not. Harry Potter was alone, but he was not forgotten. In the hearts of those who had known his parents, in the memories of those who had fought beside them, in the hopes of those who looked to him as a symbol of everything they had won and everything they had lost, Harry lived on. The boy who lived, the chosen one, the orphan in the cupboard. He was all of these things, and none of them. He was simply Harry, a child who had lost everything before he was old enough to know what he had lost. A baby who had defeated the darkest wizard of the age through no power of his own, through nothing more than his mother's love. And as the world moved forward, as the seasons turned and the years passed, Harry would grow in that cupboard, surrounded by people who neither loved him nor understood him, waiting for the day when he would learn who he truly was, waiting for the day when he would return to the world that had never stopped celebrating his name, waiting for the day when the story that began on that Halloween night in 1981 would continue, and the boy who lived would become something more than a legend. He would become a hero. But that day was still years away. For now, there was only the darkness of the cupboard, the coldness of the Dursleys' house, and the distant echo of a world that had moved on without him. The first Halloween after Voldemort's fall had changed everything and nothing. The war was over. But for Harry Potter, the battle was only just beginning.